Hello, my name is Professor Laura Sosar, and I am here to prepare you for your first journey into the past. On this trip, you will be sent back to the Roaring 20s, a time of great economic prosperity and freedom in some ways, yet a loss of freedom in other ways. You will be spending 3 months in the big city of Chicago in the year 1925. This was a place with rising jazz stars, a thriving entertainment scene, but also of gang activity and speakeasies. At this time, the prohibition was in effect, meaning the production, distribution, and importation of alcohol was illegal. People were not happy with the prohibition, and thus speakeasies arose. Speakeasies were underground establishments that provided bootlegged alcohol to citizens. They had the potential for providing high profits for their owners due to the rising demand for liquor among citizens. Thus, many arose during the Prohibition. The speakeasies required a password to enter them, and their name came from the idea that people should avoid talking nervously or too quickly when buying alcohol at the bars, so as not to draw any attention to them. Although illegal, the speakeasies were very popular and profitable businesses, and became a large part of social life throughout the decade. You should note that the 1920s were a time of significant change in American culture. The First World War had just ended, and the economy was thriving, which led to the rise of consumer society. Immigration drastically increased at this time in major cities such as New York and Chicago, and governments found it necessary to assert control of the population. This is one of the factors that led to the ratification of the Prohibition at the time. The first purpose of this trip is for you to observe how the Prohibition affected life in Chicago during the 1920s. The Prohibition, also known of as the Noble Experiment, was put in place due to the fact that alcohol was blamed for many of society's downfalls, such as crime, murder, and health problems. Most citizens were strongly against the Prohibition and thus were willing to break the law by purchasing illegal liquor from the variety of available suppliers via speakeasies. Gangs would supply speakeasies with alcohol by smuggling it into America from the Caribbean or Canada. Liquor was also transported to speakeasies in unconventional ways, as it was sometimes hidden inside garden hoses, coconut shells, fake books, and even stashed into empty eggshells. Due to the rise in speakeasies, the government employed the prohibition agents to seek out and raid these illegal establishments. However, they were often underpaid and subject to bribery, making them ineffective in their efforts to shut down the speakeasies. An important implication of the prohibition to keep in mind is that although its purpose was to decrease crime, it had the opposite effect. Gangs and criminals who were already involved in gambling and prostitution saw the speakeasies as an ideal opportunity to make easy money, resulting in the mafia dominating entire cities, including Chicago. A new black market for alcohol entirely dominated by gangs arose, and police forces were often diverted from focusing on other criminal activity in their attempt to deal with the rising gang violence and bootlegging. One significant figure involved in the mafia was Al Capone. Your goal will be to observe him and his actions, making note of how the Prohibition enabled him to form and control a bootlegging empire in Chicago. You will be able to recognize him as having a scar along his cheek, which was given to him by a knife in a Brooklyn nightclub one night. As part of the mafia, Capone had fled to Chicago to avoid a murder charge in 1919, the year the Prohibition was ratified. Once in Chicago, Capone joined the notorious 5 Points gang and quickly moved up its ranks to become the right-hand man to leader Johnny Torrio. You will not have to worry about Torrio as he left the country, handing full control of the gang to Capone. In order to get close enough to observe the activities surrounding the mafia and the illegal liquor trade, you will be working under the manager of a popular speakeasy, which Al Capone is closely affiliated with. To ensure that you are safe during your stay, you will not be working directly with Capone, as he was involved with violence on a daily basis. Capone was in conflict with the opposing North Side gang and would travel everywhere with his bodyguards in a fully armed limousine to avoid risking involvement in a shooting or any violence. you will simply be working as a server in Al Capone's favorite speakeasy, giving you the chance to have a first-hand perspective of the excitement of the mafia and an inside look at how the speakeasies functioned at a safe distance. Additionally, you will not have to worry about being reprimanded by the law for breaking any rules, seeing as most police departments were bought off by Capone's bribes. Bribes were easy to achieve because in the 1920s, Chicago experienced a rise in immigrants. Its government system was not prepared to handle this influx of people, as the size of their police force failed to grow in accordance with the population. Due to the corrupt nature of the government at the time, Al Capone easily paid off the law enforcement agents and politicians in the districts where he operated his illegal businesses. Seeing as Al Capone made over $100 million a year, these bribes were easy for him to hand out at about $250,000 each. In addition to knowing about speakeasies and the mafia, the second goal of this trip is to learn about the social conditions, trends, and fads that were popular in the 1920s. These things are also important to know in order to blend in as a young adult at the time. In the 1920s, the flourishing economy led to the rise of consumer culture and an emphasis on having fun, as Americans had extra money to spend on entertainment, clothes, and appliances. This was also the first time that automobiles were made available to everyday citizens, priced relatively low and mass-produced. All of these changes at the time left young people feeling a heightened sense of freedom and independence. Women also had a newfound freedom. They had just won the right to vote, and the idea of the new woman was replacing their traditional role. They embraced new flapper fashions and broke traditional norms by smoking in public. Another change in American life at this time was that the radio was just becoming widespread, making news, information, and music accessible to the masses, and allowing people to feel more connected with the rest of the nation. Another important aspect of the 1920s was jazz music, which came to be the most popular musical genre, especially in Chicago. This was a city with a thriving jazz scene, a place that gave rise to jazz hit artists such as King Oliver and Louis Armstrong. Chicago speakeasies often hosted jazz musicians to provide live music in upbeat atmospheres. In case you find yourself at a dance hall or a jazz club, some popular dances at the time include the Charleston, the Cakewalk, the Black Bottom, and the Flea Hop. Popular artists to know include Ben Burney, Vernon Dalhart, Bessie Smith, and Gene Austin, to name a few. During the 1920s, the film industry was also growing, which meant that going to the movies was one of the main activities for the youth at the time. People were eager to watch big movie stars such as Charlie Chaplin and big sports stars at the time such as Babe Ruth. Overall, the 1920s were an exciting time in America, with the growth of cities, rise of consumer culture, and upsurge of mass entertainment. There was a sense of freedom and joy. While the Prohibition ultimately led to a black market of organized crime, there was still a sense of excitement and intrigue about the power of the mafia, which bred some of the nation's most famous criminals. Thus, your trip should encapsulate both the light and dark parts of the era. The lively Chicago nightlife and the jazz clubs, the new economic freedom and access to automobiles, as well as the prominence of bribery, the dangers of gang wars, and the ultimate failure of the Prohibition in reducing crime in America. Good luck and have a safe trip.